working on Martin Luther King Day, which seems a little bit odd, but if we're going to work on Martin Luther King Day, I guess we will work for diversity and inclusion. So we have a great lineup of excellent speakers whose computers totally hook up to the tech. So nothing can go wrong. And our first speaker is Wesley James.
Great. Hello, so my name is Wesley James from the University of Central Florida, and we're presenting Evaluating the Effectiveness of Training Instructors in Universal Design for Learning. So there's a QR code here along with the links to the slides. It's a little hard to see, but it's tiny.cc/W, J underscore, W, A, P, T, 20. And then there's also going to be a screen cap of this if you want that for any reason. So, moving forward, and this was done collaboratively with myself, Sasha Caragina, and then Jacqueline J. Cheney, all at UCF. So this project is first and foremost centered on supporting students with disabilities, and to do that we want to support instructors in that area. This is important because students with disabilities make up between 10 to 20% of the college population, and post-secondary instructors don't know how to support students with disabilities, and this is likely because few STEM instructors have received training in teaching, and even fewer have received training in supporting students with disabilities. Our framework for supporting instructors and subsequently supporting students is Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and this is a framework to support the variation across learners because we believe that learners vary across needs, interests, and abilities. And so to do this, there's three principles to begin with. These are providing multiple means of engagement, providing multiple means of representation, and providing multiple means of action and expression. And these kind of break down into options and support, so providing flexibility. These then further break down into guidelines and then checkpoints. We're going to really focus on the guidelines in this presentation. So the guidelines for multiple means of engagement are multiple means of recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, and self-regulation. For representation, multiple means of perception, language, mathematical expressions, and symbols, and comprehension. And then for multiple means of action and expression, we have physical action, expression, and communication, and executive function. And these are provided by CAST. One thing you may notice is the numbers are out of order, and that's because at one point they were in the correct order, and then they updated them to the UDL 2.2 guidelines, and so they kept the numbers but moved them around. So just clarity on that. The instructors we recruited are both from physics and from chemistry. We recruited 3 physics faculty teaching scale-up course, and then 3 chemistry TAs teaching an inquiry-based chemistry lab. The scale-up course, there's a picture here which shows a bunch of circle tables that each would hold 9 students and then have 3 computers. And then the chemistry lab is a very traditional tabletops with the sinks and all the kind of things you normally see in a chemistry lab. Both of these courses use evidence-based and peer-centered pedagogies, which is very important because it allows more flexibility in the practices you can implement. As far as the timeline for working with instructors, we first observed their courses. So this was during the baseline semester to identify areas of improvement and identify areas where they were doing really well in regarding accessibility. We then did these trainings with presentations regarding the experiences of students with disabilities in Universal Design for Learning. And then we worked with them at the end of training to develop and implement practices to increase accessibility. So they decided what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. And that occurred then in the implementation semesters, which could be 1 or 2 semesters depending on the instructor. We then interviewed them before and after implementation, so we can see here the pre-interview occurred before the baseline semester even began, and then we did a post-interview at the end of the implementation semester at the end of their involvement in the project. And so these interviews were 1 hour and focused on investigating the practices they implemented, and these were broken down into the 3 UDL principles. So how are they presenting content to students? How are they having them engage with it? How are they having the students express their understanding? We then analyze these interviews. I say we, this was done collaboratively with Sasha, as I mentioned previously. And so these interviews were first transcribed, and then they were coded for the teaching, practicing, and strategies that the instructor used in their course. And then we identified if these were before or after UDL training. Were these things they were already doing, or were these things new that hopefully they were doing because of the training? We then coded these strategies based on their alignment to the UDL checkpoints, and then we did a peer review process where Sasha, so I coded all of them, and then Sasha coded a subset. We met and discussed them, and then based on that discussion, I went back and modified the coding I'd done on the rest of the items. So regarding the presentation of the results in this, I'm going to be, again, presenting the guidelines. That's where we're going to be focusing on. And we're going to be looking at the number of unique practices. I say unique practices because we coded every single practice they did, but there were some practices that were similar enough that we didn't want to basically double count them. So an example, so we collapsed them based on the similarity of action and the intended goal of the practice. So an example would be they said that they uploaded their PowerPoints online, Another point, they say they upload their notes online, so we collapse this into uploading course content online, because it's a similar thing, providing content to students outside of class. So the first results is the practices and strategies they were already doing, and how they aligned with the UDL checkpoints, and then we kind of collapse that into the guidelines. So we see here at the top is sustaining effort and persistence with 27 practices, then comprehension, 23 practices, executive functions, 15 practices, recruiting interest, 13 practices, expression and communication, 8 practices, perception, 6 practices, physical action, and self-regulation had 4 unique practices, and then language and symbols had 2. The colors just denote which principle they were under. So there's the key on the bottom for engagement is blue, representation is purple, expression is green. What I want to just kind of highlight is they're doing a lot of things regarding supports. So those first 4 guidelines are really focused on supporting students and receiving, engaging, and expressing understanding. Whereas the bottom 4 are more focused on options, providing options for how students receive, engage with, and express their understanding, along with self-regulation, which is kind of unique, and that's more of supporting students' affective, so emotional, behavioral supports in those areas. And we didn't see many practices for options, but we saw a lot in supports. Some examples of these practices, so for executive functions, which sounds maybe a bit vague and maybe you're not familiar with, this would be supporting students in organization and tracking their learning, so providing a set schedule for assignments or assessments, providing an example of what completed deliverables would look like, so whether that's a note card or a lab report. Self-regulation, again, that's one that maybe what does that exactly look like? That's going to be speeches encouraging students that they can succeed and to continue to persist in the coursework, and then encouraging the use of mental health campus resources that are available. So looking at before and then comparing that to what they decide to implement, we see here that it's roughly the same. So at the top, comprehension and sustaining effort and persistence switched, but they're roughly around the same spot, and then so on and so forth. The rest of it is roughly the same. So new practices, comprehensions at the top, sustaining effort and persistence below that with 8, executive functions has 7, expression and communication is 4, perception and physical action have both 2, recruiting interest and language and symbols both have 1, and self-regulation, there was no new practices. So the only real difference between these is that recruiting interest, they did not implement any new practices in that area. One thing I would just want to emphasize is the implemented practices were specifically just new practices. This did not account for any continued practices. So looking at the ones that they did choose to implement, we'll highlight kind of comprehension since it's at the top. So this looked like having a website or a learning management system with an overview of important concepts, and then in bolding important instruction on quizzes and exams, so supporting students with engaging with activities. And then physical action, we picked this one because this is one that we found really challenging for instructors to implement practices on. So this was providing increased time on assessments and giving students the option to submit assignments online, so either physical copy or online copy. The big takeaways are that instructors are are already doing things to support students in being engaged, understanding content, and tracking learning. But instructors are not implementing many practices to support students in emotional regulation, having options for students to engage with content, and having options for students to express their understanding. So, what's the implications? When we train instructors, they're first going to target areas that they're already comfortable with, already have ideas for, already doing a lot of things in, and that's good. That's not a bad thing, but we do need to continue to work with instructors so that they identify practices that can address areas that aren't currently supported, such as emotional regulation, having options for how to engage with content, and having options for how to express understanding. Thank you very much, and here's the link to the slides and pictures of myself, Sasha Cartagena, and then Jackie Cheney, and there's a QR code if you're interested in the slides.
We have time for a question or two while our next speaker pops up. Thanks for popping. Questions?
I'm just, what do you think is the most difficult for your faculty to implement? What do you have the most trouble getting cooperation?
So one of the challenges was the idea of options. I mean, and that the challenge with the getting options was just what does it look like? What does it look like to provide options for expression? What does it look like to provide options for how to engage with tasks? So that was challenging. It was also challenging to shift to a variability of learners mindset, because a lot of them are just like, they have this idea that they keep trying things, and that shift is hard and takes time to go from okay, all my students, if I do something, I should support all of them, to this idea of I need to implement a bunch of different things because that's going to support different students in different areas. So that was challenging. And again, we didn't see much in terms of emotional or behavioral kind of support. So those are the big areas.
Did you take any data to find out if the students did better as a result of
So we did try to take some data for that. We had some concerns because one semester a hurricane